Hi, in this video we're going to look at how to get the assets you've created into the PhyreEngine or get them prepared for the PhyreEngine. To do that we're going to use Maya. If you are a Maya user, this is fairly straightforward. If you're not a Maya user, then you just build things as you normally would do and have all your assets ready, and then we'll bring them into Maya and set them up with a shader and get them out in the collada format, which is what the PhyreEngine takes. So the asset I'm going to set up is a chair, and if I just import it, I've just set this up in a folder on my desktop, so this is obviously not how we would do this, but it kind of shows you if you just had a file full of things, this is how you would set it up. So this is just an FBX, so imagine this coming from wherever you brought it from, or you may have made it in Maya, and we'll drop it into the scene, and there's what we've got. So we've got this nice chair ready to export. I'm not going to go over the finer points of how to use Maya, but essentially hold Alt down, left click to orbit round, middle click to zoom in and out, and middle click to pan, and then right click to zoom in and out. So fairly straightforward. I mean, if you've used a host of 3D programs, then you shouldn't have any problems. Okay, so the things we're going to need to set this up is, I would have your scene set up using the outliner. So if you go to this bit on the side and you see you've got this, this represents this, which is your main scene, and then you've got your outliner. It's just quite handy to be able to see things or see the structure of your project. On the right hand side you have two boxes. You've got the channel box layer editor, which basically gives you information on where the thing's positioned, its scale, things like that, and then you've got the attribute editor, which is basically the attributes of this model. So this is the attribute editor. So this basically describes information about this particular object. So here we have the material applied to it, which is Lambert 1, which is grey, and we've got the actual information about the shape and its scale, things like that. So if you want to change any of this information, like say scale it, then you could input it here and you would be able to type it in there. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to set a few things up, like the shader. So we're using a CGFX shader, which is part of the PhyreEngine, and it's part of this suite of tools that you can install in Maya. If you're working on a machine that has all this set up already, then essentially as you go along these panels at the top, you'll have this panel which is SIE, and it will have a button for the collada tools for PhyreEngine. So if you click on this, it basically gives you this little panel, if I can move it, there we go, which has got a bunch of stuff that's going to be useful to us. If you don't have this, you can install it, and you can install it from within settings, preferences, you go down to plugin manager, and the one you're looking for in here is collada in capital letters. There you go. So if it's loaded or auto load, so yeah, there we go, and this should give you this. So let's talk about this tool. Okay, so the top part is switch to CGFX mode. So this basically will require you, the first time you run this, or you want to run it in a mode that allows you to preview this stuff, it will have to be running in CGFX mode. By clicking this button, it will basically set up the environment to allow that to happen. Mine's already set up, so I'm not going to do that. But if you click it, you'll have to restart Maya for the changes to take place. Again, you preview these things through viewport 2.0, so this will allow you to set that up and click it on, and you'll be able to view things through viewport 2.0. You can press this button to generate a 3-point light rig, which we'll come back to. Delete unused shader nodes. So PhyreEngine can complain about things being attached to the file that shouldn't be, and one of them is shaders. This comes in with this Lambert shader. You've got to be really careful that when you apply new shaders to it, this Lambert thing will still be hanging around inside here. And if you brought an object in with shaders, with textures and materials applied to it, the likelihood is it will still try and retain them within the file. And PhyreEngine can be very particular about that and doesn't like that so much. So it's a good idea to basically, once you know that all the shaders that are applied to this object are the ones you want, if you hit that, then it will delete everything that you're not using. Create default lit shader allows you to create a non-PBR shader if that's what you want to do. And obviously this one, create new PBR shader, allows you to do that. You can more or less, for now, ignore this stuff. Export mesh. If you save this into the right area where you want everything to be, if you hit export mesh, it will take the name of your file and it will place it in the same folder as the DAE, all set up to go. However, you may want to customize a few things. So I don't tend to use it. I tend to just export stuff kind of the old-fashioned way, because I like to have the control. And that's the way I'm going to show you. And export rigged character, export animation. Obviously they're things you would use if you were doing either of those things, which with a chair we are not, so we're not going to worry about those. Okay, so we have a chair. So the first thing we need to do is, I think you should save this where you plan for it to go. Now I'm going to show you the structure for reveal on this PC. This may be different, will depend purely on your project. So I have, so if I go to save scene, I'm going to go to my documents, and I have a reveal media folder which has media within it, and this has all of the information I need for the project. And within that there's a folder called models. So the likelihood is whatever your project looks like, it's going to look something like this. And within that it is going to have a models folder and a shaders folder. They're the two main ones that matter in this case. Why they matter is because the way that the exported files work is they use like a relative path structure. So your shaders are basically in this folder, and not that we can see those now because we're not looking at that file type, and your model is going to be in this folder or this type of folder. And it's important that when you set these things up in here, that they know where the shaders are relative to where they are. So it kind of doesn't really matter too much where you put these things, other than they've got to know where they're supposed to go. So in this models folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this test _ chair. So I'm going to know that that's my folder for my chair, and within test chair I'm going to save this as test _ chair. Yes, I'm using a student version for this. Okay, so that is that saved. Now if I was to use this export mesh command, it would save this out as a DAE and it would call it test chair, and that would be that. So the first thing I probably want to do is I want to make sure that this armchair is probably got the same name as well. So I'm going to call this test chair, so it's all named the same thing. And you can see by changing that, it basically becomes test chair here, and nothing else changes. Okay, so I've got my test chair. In placement's important, as in when we bring this object in, the pivot is going to be from the center of the world. As you can see, that's placed here. So if I move this to over here and I bring it into PhyreEngine, the pivot for it is still going to be here. It's not going to be here. So it's important to put your objects in the correct place. I'll show you an example of where you would maybe change that. But for this object, when we bring it in to anything, we would want to basically use the pivot to be on the base of the thing in the center of the object. So that kind of makes sense. Okay, so that's sorted. You can, if you want to reset everything, you can delete history. So if you've made any changes, you can do delete by type, delete history, and that will delete anything extra in here. And also the other one is to freeze transforms, which is freeze transforms. You can do that in there, and that would basically zero out a load of stuff. It can't do it for this one because these are locked. So if I break those connections, and then you shouldn't need to do that on most models. That's just this one for some reason it's got that. And then if we go to modify freeze transformations, basically everything this gets zeroed out and set to 1. It's kind of in max terms it's equivalent of X4. Okay, so let's actually do something. Okay, so we want to set up a shader. So let's create a new PBR shader, and I'm going to call this one mat underscore chair. So the mat is basically material, but it doesn't matter what you call it as long as you've got your own system that works. I'm going to call mine mat chair and hit OK. So I've created this shader. It's not attached to anything at the moment. It's just a shader. Now the way these shaders work is basically there's a CGFX. It's a CGFX shader. It needs a shader file, so it basically needs a profile to tell it what type of shader it is. Now, by telling it what type of shader it is, it basically will give you different information down in here. The default is basically the Fire PBR shader. And as you can see here, what it's done is it's found our media shaders folder, and it's found FirePBR.fx for a PBR shader. And that potentially could be okay. However, because I'm using the Reveal project, we have our own version of this shader, and that's one of the things is you can use different shaders. So what I'm going to do is just to show you, is I'm going to navigate here to find it and find where this folder is. So this folder is basically in media shaders. You remember the model itself is in media models. So if we come back out to Reveal media, so our model is in this folder, our shaders are in this folder. And as you can see, there's a lot of shaders here. The one we're looking for is RV PBR. So that stands for Reveal PBR.fx. I open this. And essentially what we have now is we have this PBR shader. Now, not a lot's changed. There's not a lot of difference between the two shaders, other than there's a few optimizations. It just compiles a bit quicker. And we chopped a few things out that don't get used very often. Okay, so if you look down in here, we have material switches. Now the material switches basically allow you to switch functionality on and off. By adding more things, you create more complexity in the compiling of the shader. But as standard, it has cast shadows, lighting, normal mapping, receive shadows, and texture applied. However, for this model, we are going to need a bit more than that. So let me... Oh, this is interesting as well. Because I've been working on the shader, and I've clicked off it, and I'm now back on the model, and the model doesn't have the shader applied to it, we've lost a shader. There's a few ways you can find it. You can go through Hypershade, things like that. The easiest way to deal with this is to basically, if you right-click on the model, go down to Assign Existing Material, and then find Mat Chair and apply it, because you're going to have to do it anyway. So all we've done now is we've just swapped out the Lambert for this one. So that's what's applied to this object now. We hit 6 on the keyboard. We basically move to Shaded Display, and we can actually see it applied. Nice white thing that's not really telling you anything at the moment, and that's because it needs lights and all sorts of stuff. Okay, so we're going to need with this, we're going to need roughness, because we've got a roughness channel, and we're also going to need the metal channel because we're using the PBR roughness workflow with roughness metallic workflow, and this has some metal elements on it, so we're going to need that as well. And by clicking those, we essentially get some extra slots up here to put things in, and that's what we're going to do. We're just basically going to feed in some textures. Before we can do that though, we need to have a look at the texture format, so we're going to jump over to Photoshop.